What is up? Best Bets is live. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. East Coast time, and we are just a few hours away from wondering if the Brooklyn Nets are going to be the 7 seed, maybe the 8 seed, maybe not in the playoffs at all. But no, they'll be in the playoffs. It's good to have everybody with us. Ben Heisler, joined by Brooklyn Nets P1 Reed Wallach. New York Knicks fans Peter Dewey and Donovan Smoot still representing their teams, even though they are not with us in the postseason. And I'm Ben Heisler, got my old school Chicago Bulls MJ Goat jersey from the mid 1980s. No, I am not that old, but thank you for asking if that was coming in the chat today. Fellas, we got NBA playoff basketball, and we are going to go over it over the next 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on where the conversation takes us. But the goal of today's show is to try and evaluate whether or not there are teams in this year's postseason that we feel legitimately good about. Are we going to go ahead and take a future? Are these teams a fraud? It's fraud or future here on the program today. And I think where we have to get started before we dive into these different tiers and matchups ahead of the course of tonight is I need to check the pulse of one Reed Wallach. He is going to be attending the Brooklyn Nets hosting the Cleveland Cavaliers tonight. They are 9.5-point favorites over at win total, going from 230 down to 226.5. I feel the confidence. I felt the confidence from you this morning. I know that you're naturally going to raise yourself up there, but is this team covering tonight, or are they going to go ahead and keep it interesting and do what they do over the course of the year at home, which is make things way too close for comfort?
Probably won't cover, win, not cover. I think what I say this morning, like 123, 117 victory, like really stressful, make it as difficult as humanly possible because it's the only way the Nets know how to play. But in terms of long-term outlook, and we're going to get into a little bit, I feel pretty optimistic about where the Nets stand going into the playoffs. I mean, I don't really get how people go into a postseason. I guess maybe if you're a team that doesn't have championship aspirations, but when you have Kevin Durant on the court, how are you not optimistic? I don't understand I obviously am plugged in on the Nets, and I just don't understand how people are self-deprecating as your team is gearing up. You have Kevin Durant, you always have a chance. You're never done until we saw him basically play 4-on-5 basically by himself, almost beat the eventual NBA champion. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good going into the playoffs, and we'll, I imagine, get into it very soon. But an overarching, I guess before we start, we should start with overarching playoff thoughts. I feel we're about to get into these wild card things. This isn't the NCAA tournament where UNC could make a run. I feel there's really 6 teams, less than half in reality.
I don't even know if I go that far, to be honest with you.
I feel we need to kind of set the stage for what the NBA playoffs are, because you really have I guess the Eastern Conference is a little bit more wide open, but there's a very small group of teams that can actually win a championship. Regardless of what you think about the Nets, just in general, I feel you need to frame the NBA playoffs the really good teams over an 82-game sample size, and the teams with the best players, they're going to probably win the championship. You're not going to have your North Carolina run to the Final Four and upset everyone. It just doesn't really happen like that, obviously barring significant injury. So I feel we should start there before we do anything pick-wise.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Reed, because you look at both conferences, and with the play-in tournament, the Nets are the only play-in tournament team that you could probably make an actual case for winning a title, which means you're already limiting yourself to 6 teams in each conference. And then you go from there, and Ben's not going to like it, but do we really think the Bulls can contend for a title? There's once you get yourself down to it, there really are only a handful of teams that can win, which is important in the futures market when you're going to place your bets. The odds might be enticing, but you have to think of the path they're going to have to take to get there. Can they beat this team in a 7-game series? Can they match up with this team in a 7-game series? There's so many variables in there where when you really break it down, and we'll get to it in terms of the numbers and everything, there's really only a few teams that can win. So you have to be strategic and smart about when you're going to place these different futures. And also, Ben, I know you said I was repping the Knicks, but I actually got my Lower Merion Kobe Bryant jersey on today because we're trying to get we're looking for winners. So maybe one of the best winners in the history of the NBA. Gotta rep him today.
Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. Although his former team not in the playoffs as well, they are currently searching to try and steal away Nick Nurse or maybe sign Mark Jackson for some reason.
They're flying down to Cancun. They're just enjoying the offseason.
As well they should. They've certainly earned a trip to only play 82 games this season and should be well rested by the time the playoffs start next year. Are you on board with that, Donovan, that there's only like maybe 3-4 teams this year that like realistically have a chance at a title? Because if we're using, say, the Phoenix Suns as an example from a season ago, I think there was a lot of thought that they would be knocked out of the playoffs early by the Lakers, and they kept hanging around. They were obviously the number 2 seed in the West a season ago, and now over the course of another year and a longer sample, we know that they're legit. But like, is there a team that maybe could be this year's version of the Phoenix Suns this year?
I think, okay, so depending on, and all of this depends on like how you see these teams. So I think legitimately in the West, there's 2 teams. It's Phoenix and Golden State.
Glad you said that. Said that.
It's Phoenix and Golden State in the West. And then depending on how you see Memphis, that Memphis could be the wild card in the West. In the East, you have Milwaukee, you have Milwaukee, and you have Brooklyn. And even for me, I only have Brooklyn in that tier because they have Kevin Durant. And so like it's kind of those 2 teams. And then the other ones is, do we actually trust Boston to take whatever run that they're on and transfer it to playoff basketball? Do we think Miami can do it without a true like superstar bucket getter? You know, do we think that Doc Rivers isn't going to implode this year and actually, you know, coach properly? So there's 3 wild cards. So I think in each conference, you say like lock contenders, there's 2. There's 2 in each conference, and then each one of them you would have to have a whole lot of luck to get there.
I think that's a reasonable take. I think there's, besides sort of that top tier, and again, when we go through our fate or future picks, we have it divided into 3 different tiers. We have the favorites, which consists of those 4 teams that you mentioned, the Suns, the Bucks, the Nets, and the Warriors. The contenders, which I think it wouldn't necessarily surprise anybody if they made it to the NBA Finals, but maybe would be a surprise if they won. But I think they'd still be underdogs in the latter portion of the year to get there. That's the Celtics, the Heat, the 76ers, and the Grizzlies. And then I think you kind of look at everybody else in sort of a wild card range where you have a very large possibility of circumstances that could happen. Like, I think one of the teams that we'll get into, it wouldn't surprise us if they're playing, a team like Milwaukee in the East for a chance to go and play, maybe a team like Brooklyn in the East as well to go ahead and make it for a shot at the NBA Finals. There's just a high level of variance for these teams where we've seen them do it over the course of the year, but how true of a chance do they genuinely have? And so that's where I think we kind of have to start things off here. So let's start with the contenders. That to me is, I think, the more interesting note, because these are going to be the teams that are going to be heavily bet over at WynnBET Sportsbook when it comes to actually having a chance to win the whole thing, right? So if we're starting from the very beginning, and by the way, I said contenders, I realized this, our producer extraordinaire, Joanne Stoner, put the actual contenders on the list. The favorites are where I think we need to start. The contenders to actually win it, the favorites at the top of the list, so bad job by me. So you have Phoenix plus 250, followed by the Bucks, the Nets at 6-1, and then Golden State at 9-1. I think we're all in agreement here that if any of these teams ended up winning the finals, nobody would blink an eye, correct?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think people would blink an eye if the Nets actually pull it off. I do believe that, just by the way they're talking about it. The way the Nets are playing in the media. Listen, you got to have it one way or not. You got
nah.
He's already,
because you said that Kevin Durant, like they have Kevin Durant. You said it yourself, like they have Kevin Durant. Like everybody can say like,
news to me. I know exactly what this team is capable of, but
I don't disagree with
how
you.
people perceive them.
I just think we can say like people perceive them as they can't make the finals, but like the entire season they've been in the top 3 in the odds to win the finals. Like this isn't like everybody knew they were going to get here. It was just a question of were they going to be healthy come playoff time? Like they lost. What was it?
Already speaking for the public, walking it back. Please.
they lost all those games in the middle of the year when Durant got hurt and Harden was basically mailing it in prior to the trade. And their odds didn't move because everybody knew as long as they found their way into the playoff field, like the Nets were going to be dangerous. I think that's what we all have been waiting for. Obviously, it was going to depend on the matchup. If they got Milwaukee in the first round, I think we're having a different conversation right now. But they didn't. They're probably going to get Boston, or maybe they get Miami, which is exactly what you would have wanted if you were a Nets fan. So I don't think people will be too surprised. It's Kevin Durant, man. It's Kevin Durant.
I don't know. There's definitely a different type of sentiment in the media, in my opinion.
I think it's just the path that they have to get there, because
You're saying their path is easy?
No, I'm saying it changes. I'm saying the conversation changes should they win tonight, become the 7 seed, and have to play Milwaukee in the first round. Like, for anybody that's considering
I'm not following. To me, the harder path is if the Nets win tonight. They would then have a harder path to the finals.
Yes, we're in agreement on that. I'm talking about whether
so then it would be a surprise if they get to the finals.
But are we saying it's a surprise if the Nets beat the Bucks? Are we considering if Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant, it shouldn't be a surprise if they beat them. That's the way I'm looking at it. If the Nets are as good as we were saying they are, it should not be a surprise if they win.
I don't think people think the Nets are that good anymore, though. I think people look at the Nets as a flawed roster. That's what I'm trying to say. I think people would be surprised if the Nets actually pull this off because they don't trust their lack of continuity, their lack of depth, and they just see them as again, I'm going to get into it, but they see them as a bad defensive team. Not to mention their path is very difficult. So I think, yes, people would be very shocked if they were to actually pull this off.
No, I don't. I don't think that the people would be shocked at all, because if they ended up playing Milwaukee in the first round, which obviously they're not.
Why are we? But they're not playing. There's no way they play Milwaukee in the first round.
I know. What I'm saying is, when that was still on the table last week, it was a toss-up for a lot of people, and especially for the last year, everyone's been like, oh, well, the Nets were a shoe size away from being in the finals anyways with only Kevin Durant. And so if Giannis didn't go out and have an all-time great finals performance, the whole, Bucks championship thing would have been derailed, at least how people talk about it, because they say, oh, the Nets should have been there. So in this entire year, people have been saying the Nets are going to be there. They just have to be healthy. Like Peter said, they just have to be healthy at that time. And so it doesn't really matter if they're playing Miami or if they're playing Boston in the first round. People see them as equals, even though that they're coming in at the 7 or 8 seed. And people understand that their seeding is only is only a product of injury, not talent.
Okay, I agree with you. I just think that the general public will not see a Nets title as that likely. That's how I'm seeing it. I'm not talking about betting market. I'm just saying how the general public will see it.
I think it'll change. I think it'll evolve over time. If they get past Milwaukee in the first round, then the conversation.
They're not playing Milwaukee.
Second round. They'd have to play the Bucks in the second round.
Second round. Okay, yeah. That's right, because the Bucks are playing Chicago in the second round. I keep having the Bucks in my head as the number 2 seed. Boston, sure enough, the number 2 seed there when it comes to the Eastern Conference standings. Okay, so if the Bucks and the Nets were to play each other in the second round, I think we'd likely assume that Milwaukee would be substantial favorites in that series. If we were setting series
up, substantial.
You don't think so?
They would.
If I set the odds,
if Ben Simmons is back, they are not substantial favorites. There's no way.
Let's keep it moving so we can talk about future of fraud.
Okay. I do want to come back to this because I'm curious to see whether or not who here is actually listing the Bucks versus the Nets as the actual favorite. So let's make it easy. Let's start with you, Reed. Tell me why the future is the Nets, other than the fact that you're going to the game and you're at every game and you have a Jason Kidd jersey behind you in the background.
Yeah, I always mess this up right there.
Right there.
Yeah, big Nets fan, so of course very biased, but I would like to think that I'm a fairly rational, level-headed. I could assess what is going on with the team. And I'll tell you this.
Judge of that.
I'm pretty confident Ben Simmons is going to be back by game 3 of this first round. Whoever they're playing, assuming they get through the playing game, I think Ben Simmons will be back by game 3. And it's not like they're asking him to be a superhero. They're asking him to play 10, maybe 15, 20 minutes a game, play defense against someone like Jason Tatum, someone like Chris Middleton. I don't think the expectation for Ben Simmons isn't very high. That being said, the Nets need someone like Ben Simmons to grab rebounds, push the pace in transition. That's just the Ben Simmons outlook of it. The reason why they're favorites is they have Kevin Durant. They have the best player on the floor. So they're never out of a series. I think that they are probably going to open as small underdog, assuming they win tonight. I think they open as small underdogs against the Boston Celtics. I think that they are bigger underdogs against the Bucks. I think that they could get past both of them. I think Boston, if you look back the last year, throw out James Harden for a second. The only time that the Celtics have beaten the Nets has been when Jason Tatum has gone for 50-plus points. And then this past year when they played last month, Robert Williams on the floor. Robert Williams isn't going to be back for the first round. I'd be fairly shocked if he wasn't playing a big role. So the Nets are going to get a shorthanded Celtics team while they're getting healthier. And again, it's playoff basketball. It's a little bit different. Like, sure, Jason Tatum could get his, but again, Kevin Durant's going to match you. I think the Nets get past Boston, who's shorthanded, and they don't have the deepest rotation either. And then Milwaukee, you hope Simmons is a little bit more acclimated by then. I think that there's not a huge gap between the two teams. A few bounces here and there determine it. And then whoever comes from the other side, if it's Toronto, I guess that's a problem because of vaccination status and whatnot. But if it's probably going to be Miami, sure, the Nets will get past by then, the Nets will be off and running, and they'll be seen as the title favorites as they should have been or as they were going into the year. So it's not necessarily the most plus EV bet because you're probably having to pay a tax just to bet them in the futures market. But this is the team that, to me, still has the biggest upside of any team in the league. Last point on the Bucks. Since March 12th, just going back a month, random day, the Bucks are 21st in defensive rating. The Nets are 9th. So I know we talk about how the Nets have no defense. They're playing like a top 10 defensive team. And with Kyrie and Durant on the floor, they're plus 13 net rating. They would have the best offense in the league. So this team is still a juggernaut, and they're hopefully getting an all-defensive player back in Ben Simmons. So there is my case for the Nets. Please rip it up. Go.
All right, we got a case for the Nets. Donovan and Peter, I know that you guys are having a different opinion when it comes to, like, none of us are on the Nets. Do we think there's like front runners and favorites and in that conversation? Certainly. But you guys have a team that you like better.
Yeah. I'm all in on the Bucks. I've been in the Bucks for a while. I have a plus 700 future in them. I bet back in February. And this again, like, Reed makes some great points with the Nets. I genuinely think the Nets are the second best team in the Eastern Conference. I think the Bucks are slightly better purely because of exactly what he mentioned with the depth issues and the Ben Simmons issue. Is we don't know what Ben Simmons is going to be. He might be great when he comes back, but he also might only be able to play 10, 15 minutes a game. He's not going to give you, something crazy on offense. Do you really want to play Ben Simmons against the Giannis Antetokounmpo or Chris Middleton in the second round? I think the Nets get past the Celtics for exactly what Reed said. That no Robert Williams, and Boston's rotation is extremely thin. If you were going to try and go shot for shot with Kevin Durant in the playoffs, it's just not going to work. Like, we've seen it happen time and time again. It's not going to work. The Bucks almost couldn't do it with 3 guys against them last year. But if the Bucks are healthy and the Nets, even if Simmons is back, you get into that second round series. I just think Milwaukee, when you look at their rotation, they can go 8-9 deep of experienced guys who are on that team that went to the finals last year. And I just think there's nobody on Brooklyn that can stop Giannis. I don't think there's anybody who can stop Kevin Durant either, but we've seen it when they played this season. The issue is if Kevin Durant and Kyrie both aren't going, the Nets, the rest of the team, you're relying on Bruce Brown. You're relying on Seth Curry, who's banged up entering the playoffs. I don't like a Nick Claxton against Giannis matchup, even though I'll give Claxton credit. The last time they played in that overtime game, he battled. Just Giannis is just too strong. He's way too big. I think he might be the best player in the playoffs, and that is not a knock on Kevin Durant. It's just how good Giannis has been this entire season. And so for me, the way I look at this is Milwaukee, yes, they have been bad defensively as of late. Despite that, they're still 14th in the league in defensive rating. Joe Summers, one of our writers, pointed out today that the teams that win the NBA Finals, they are normally top 8 in offense rating over the last 17 years and top 11 in defensive rating. The Bucks just missed the defensive rating threshold. The Nets are not even close in the defensive rating threshold. They're 20th. Yes, they've been playing better as of late, but does that change when you are playing against elite competition every single night in the playoffs? I just don't, unless Ben Simmons is like a miracle worker and comes back, which we've seen in the playoffs him wilt when he is healthy. I do not see a semi-healthy Ben Simmons completely switching that series. I don't think it's going to be like a blowout, but Bucks in 7 in that series, I think 100%. And then you go the rest of the Eastern Conference. Miami would be the only other team that scares me. Doc Rivers is not going to win a first-round series. They're going to lose to the Raptors. He's going to get outcoached by Nick Nurse, and James Harden's been terrible. So I've already bet that. I bet the Raptors. I'll stake my claim on that. But I don't think Miami can keep up with the Nets or the Bucks offensively if they get there. So I like Milwaukee here. It wouldn't surprise me if the Nets upset them, but I just think defensively that the Nets are just going to have too many shortcomings to stop Giannis, Middleton, and Drew.
And I agree with all of that. The Bucks have been my pick to win the title since the start of the season. I picked them to go back to back, and it's because when you talk about playoff basketball, they kind of have the least amount of holes. And before I get to the Bucks, I want to say this on the Boston Brooklyn series. I would not be shocked if the Celtics, even without Robert Williams, beat Brooklyn in the first round. I think last year they pushed them. That series was 5 games, but they didn't have Jaylen Brown then, and
Really?
also Brown did not play. Brown had
Jaylen Brown had the broken wrist.
Yeah, he had a torn ligament in his wrist, and so it was just Jason Tatum there, and so Tatum he had to go for 50 to get that one win. But now you're seeing Jason Tatum. He's arguably first team, second team All NBA. He's coming into his own. What does he look like when he has a second star next to him, to where he doesn't have all the offensive pressure on him? So I think that's going to be very interesting. We talk about a first round matchup between Boston and Brooklyn, and then once we get to Milwaukee, right? Post All-Star break, Milwaukee has the 5th best offense in the league. Their offensive rating is 119.1. The Nets is 117.9. We're kind of splitting hairs. The defensive rating post All-Star break, it's a difference of less than a point, right? So I understand the defensive numbers that Milwaukee is putting on the page. They also do have a defensive player of the year candidate in Giannis. And now that Brook Lopez is back, and obviously he's not like Brook Lopez, but when you put him on the floor, it allows Giannis to play his natural, defensive position and where he's best at, which is just that roaming presence and covering down from the corner, being that rim protector. And so we saw a lot last year that he wasn't able to go one-on-one with KD because almost nobody is. But if you're telling me that I'm going to have a peak Giannis at the rim and a Giannis who offensively has gotten better this year, if the Bucks and the Nets play, Giannis is the best player on the floor. And I believe that Giannis is the best player in the world right now. And so that's what I'm saying. I think that in a matchup, I would take Bucks in 6, just because I think that Giannis offensively has elevated to a higher place. And I think that defensively, once we get down to playoff basketball, things start to get slower. And now you have elite rim protection. I would take that over what the Nets are offering right now.
Well, what I'm very intrigued in a potential Nets-Bucks series is, I know Kyrie got hurt last year, so we didn't really get to see it, but the Drew Holiday-Kyrie Irving matchup, I think, is extremely important for the Bucks, because Drew Holiday is one of, if not the best perimeter defender in the NBA. And so if Drew Holiday can keep Kyrie Irving in check, and this is why, and Reed, I agree with you that the Nets have like a potential with Simmons where they can come into their own offensively, but like, if you're telling me the Nets have to rely on Bruce Brown to make jump shots, and Seth Curry will make jump shots, so I'm not gonna, but like, rely on Andre Drummond to get you some baskets down low. Like, it can't all be on Kevin Durant. So the thing that worries me is in the playoffs, we see a lot of iso ball, we see a lot of one-on-one matchups. They're going to double Durant anytime he gets into a spot. Like, if he posts up Chris Middleton, they're going to send a second guy, which means you need your tertiary players, your role players, to be able to consistently knock down shots. I feel like the Bucks have more guys between Pat Connaughton, Grayson Allen, Wesley Matthews, who's been there before, to make those type of shots than Brooklyn does. If Joe Harris was healthy, I think it's a different scenario. But like, if Ben Simmons is on the floor, even if you have, if you go small with like a Simmons, KD is technically your 4 or 5. I just don't know if the Nets, if Kyrie isn't going, and maybe he does cook Drew Holiday, and if he does, I'll tip my hat to him. But I just don't think the Nets role guys are going. We've seen it. KD dropped 55 against the Hawks the other day, and they lost. Like, the Nets role guys are going to have to step up, and I just don't trust them nearly as much as the Bucks.
Listen, again, I don't think the margin between the Nets and Bucks is super large. I think that, the Bucks have home court this time around, so you got to give the leg up to the Bucks. I understand completely. And again, if the Nets were to lose this game, if they were to come in through the 8th seed, obviously if they get knocked out, then this past 20 minutes have been moot. But if they come to the other side, I like their chances even more because I think they happen to match up with the Phillies and the Miamis even more. Toronto, I mentioned, could be an issue, but I actually like that side better. But again, we mentioned Brook Lopez coming back, and we're talking about flipping the switch. I just noted that they are 21st, and I think so. I saw Brook Lopez came back March 14th, so I edited that filter by a few days, so there was like one game. I think they were 19th in defense rating, so a slight uptick, but still below league average. So we're talking about flipping switches. Milwaukee's defense is all of a sudden going to find its elite form. I'm just saying that I think the Nets defense is getting a bad rap when we've seen them actually shut down elite competition before. And listen, maybe I know the Nets blew that game against Milwaukee a few weeks back. They were up 9 with 3 minutes left. They ended up losing by 1. What if the Nets would have won that game? And the bounces are a little bit different. And again, it's a make or miss league, right? They did lose that game, but are we talking about this series a little bit differently if the Nets didn't blow that game? Like we just let's think of do a psychology test there. So I will say that I think the Nets have some unfinished business. I'm just saying that, we're talking about Milwaukee's defense and how the Nets can't flip a switch. All of a sudden, we're just going to assume Milwaukee's can.
I just think if
last year when the Nets were healthy, when the Nets didn't have James Harden, it was just Kyrie and Durant out there. They beat the Bucks in game 2 by like 35 points. They absolutely ran them off the floor. The Bucks were cooked in that series before Kyrie got hurt. So I'm just saying the Nets might have some unfinished business here with Milwaukee. And I understand Giannis, he might get his, but I'm more afraid of Chris Middleton anyway. And I think that with Simmons back, he can maybe, the Nets could shut down Middleton, let Giannis get his, and let Durant get it back on the other end. I trust the Nets role players.
I just think the way you make a great point with Simmons, but you can't play Simmons and a big guy at the same time. So either Milwaukee's not going to have to play Brook Lopez, or they're are you going to play Simmons and Drummond at the same time? Or Claxton at the same time?
The Bucks missed PJ Tucker. Brook Lopez got ran off the floor against the Nets last year.
But that's what I'm saying. They're not going to have to play Brook Lopez. That was the big problem. They'll just play Giannis at the 5. If they're going to play Ben Simmons, they don't have to play Brook Lopez, and then you have the extra offense on the floor.
So what's the 5? So
if you go,
who's replacing PJ Tucker?
You could go Connaughton, you go Bobby Portis. It depends on who's on the floor.
Nets can match that.
They can match, but I don't feel like that plays to the Bucks. The whole point of the Nets is you want to get the mismatches on the floor. If the Nets go small with Simmons, it's we have one less shooter, and now they're just going to play Bobby P at the 5, which is what the Bucks' best lineup has been all season anyway.
It's not just when it was the best lineup in the season; it was what led them to a championship a season ago. If we're talking about the Bucks making adjustments, Reed, they did that in the NBA Finals. We have to go back to that. I remember Amin Al-Hassan on the 11th Archer saying that they were done, that they were cooked, and then they went ahead and got the Final 4 wins the rest of the way. Milwaukee is a team that can make adjustments defensively. We thought that Giannis wasn't going to be able to make free throws in the NBA Finals. He made free throws. This is a team that is capable of making adjustments. Now, can Brooklyn make them as well? Of course. They have 2 of the best players on the planet. And now that you have Irving, that makes a substantial difference to be able to play both at home and away. It's going to be a fascinating series. The only reason that I would still fade the Nets as the team that I'm staying away from is just because of the path that it's going to take for them to get there. Milwaukee should be able to breeze past Chicago. As much as I'd love for that not to be the case, I'd love for Chicago to find something from the first handful of months of the season where they had, a pulse. But Lonzo Ball, I never thought I'd say in my life, I knew Lonzo Ball was a good player, but I never thought in my life that he would be the guiding force to Chicago's season. And then all of a sudden losing Alex Caruso. And Alex Caruso, Donovan, we talked about this on Bed and Breakfast. He's a good player. The Lakers could have really used Alex Caruso this year. He's a very, very good defender. But you lose those 2 guards. And even with DeRozan and Levine and Vucevic, 3 all-stars, they completely lose their identity. So Milwaukee has an advantage going into that potential second-round matchup of just being rested and also having a general idea of knowing what to expect with Brooklyn coming into that series and also knowing that they can adjust. So I also just think that from that perspective, and also the Nets having to play this extra game to get in, gives them a decisive advantage. Home court matters here as well. It's probably the reason that I'm fading. But I want to throw one other team quickly into the mix when it comes to the favorites. Are we looking at Golden State at 9-1, thinking to ourselves, like, maybe there's some added value on the board. Obviously, the Curry injury is substantial. Like, I don't think anybody's doubting that. But if he comes back, say for game 2, even if he misses game 1, in the 3-6 matchup against Denver, which, as you've pointed out, Peter, multiple times over the course of the year, part of the reason Jokic is the MVP is because the Nuggets stink when he's not on the court. They are one of the worst teams in net rating without Jokic available. So
-8 this year.
Yes. And Golden State, despite their frustrations on the offensive side of the ball, which is weird for them, but they're still the number 2 defensive rated team in the NBA. So all of a sudden, if Golden State gets healthy, starts making shots, starts finding their form, and then the moments that Jokic leaves the floor, they just pile on Denver. Even if they let Jokic get his, nobody else is going to be able to do anything. So I still think there's value on Golden State at 9-1, while everybody is focusing on every single other team in the East, whether it be Brooklyn or Milwaukee. And I suppose Phoenix still deserves to be in the conversation as well. They have earned it, but I'm not going to blink an eye if Golden State ends up playing the Suns and beats them. They still have an elite level team with an elite level defense that if they get hot at the right time, they can beat anybody in the league. I think there's value on Golden State.
Is Curry
100%?
Of course, that's what I'm saying. That's where it depends. If Curry is able to come back and play in the series, then yes, there's inherent value there.
I think the big thing, Ben, you pointed out, I was trying to find the stat, but I was not able to pull it up in time. But I think the Warriors have played less than 10 games with Steph, Clay, and Draymond all on the floor this year. I'm 99% sure of that. So we could see. We're not going.
Now we're bringing that stuff up again.
But that's a different. They've played together. We've seen how deadly that's been.
I know. I'm just messing with you.
Steph being out the last 12 games, not the greatest thing in the world, but Klay Thompson has been cooking over the last 12 games, well. And Jordan Poole is arguably the best number 3 option that they've had sans Kevin Durant. He's better than Harrison Barnes. He's better than Andrew Wiggins. He is by far right now the way he's playing, because he can create for himself, puts the ball on the floor. He can pass and create for others. The only thing that scares me about the Warriors is their lack of size inside defending the Jokic's, the Aytons of the world. Those are the two. If Steph doesn't play, the Nuggets scare me a little bit because Kevon Looney is not holding Jokic. Jokic is averaging 28 points, 15 rebounds, and 8 assists a game against the Warriors in 4 games this year. So that is very scary to me if Steph is unable to play, because the offense is just going to be slightly worse without him. But I like Golden State a lot just because if they do get healthy in the playoffs, we could be seeing the team we saw at the beginning of the year before, everybody just started getting hurt. So I like that play a lot at plus 900.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes to the point of Jokic could go for 50, 20, and 15.
And they still might lose.
And they still might lose because we're just not sure what everybody else is going to do. And Golden State is still an elite level defensive team. All right, really quickly, we spent a lot of time on the favorites, and rightfully so. Let's go around the horn. Donovan, Reed, Peter, your fade and your future pick. Donovan, start with you.
I'm going to fade the Nets, and then my future is the Bucks.
Reed.
Future on the Nets, of course, and then fade the Bucks. I think that Boston actually can match up with them pretty well if they get past the Nets, and the Nets would get the Bucks back from last year.
All right, Pete.
Future on the Bucks, fade in the Nets just purely because they play the Bucks. That's all why.
Future on the Warriors for me, fade the Nets. With that looming series against Milwaukee coming up in the second round. All right, those are the favorites. Let's take a look at the contenders, where I think we have a couple similarities here, but certainly a few differences as well. These are another 4 teams that, again, should they make it to the NBA Finals, I don't think we'd be that surprised, but given the 2 favorites that are ahead of them, I think most people are not anticipating that they would get there. You have Boston coming in at 10-1. Really a lot of credit for how dominant they've been, especially on the defensive side of the ball in the second half, finished with the number 1 defensive rating in the league. You have Miami, who finished as the number 1 seed. They did another really good job of improving in the second half up until maybe the final 2-3 weeks of the season, and got it turned around again under Eric Spoelstra. Sixers come in now with James Harden, Joel Embiid at 12-1. And then the Memphis Grizzlies, maybe a sleeping giant at 14-1 with Ja Morant, not only likely winning the most improved player, in fact, it's almost a guarantee he will, but was in the mix for MVP up until dealing with some of those injuries in the latter portion of the season. So amongst those contenders, let's start with a team that there's a bit of disagreement on, and that's Miami. Reed, I'll start with you because I'm in agreement with you. We both like Miami as our future play amongst this group. Why are you high on Miami in this upcoming series and then throughout the course of the postseason?
It's more path than anything. The bracket, again, we're assuming the Nets do get past the Cavs tonight. They're 9.5-point favorites. Just needs to win, and then they're on the opposite side. I would say, I think the Celtics are pretty good. I think, just based on bracket, to me, Milwaukee, Nets, and Boston, those teams are just going to beat up on each other. Miami, to me, is just a clear leg up on the top half of the bracket. That's what, to me, gives them such an edge, and they're worth betting at this number just because it's more likely they're going to get to the finals, if that makes sense. Like, I'm taking the Nets because I think that they are ultimately going to do it. But from a number perspective, the value isn't there anymore because they're going to have such a tricky path. Like, I'm probably going to do an article, assuming we see the series price come out. It's probably actually a minus EV bet to take the Nets to go to the finals at these numbers. But it's a plus EV bet to take the Heat at these numbers because they're probably going to have a favorable draw to the finals. Again, we're assuming the Nets win. So I don't love the Heat to win the championship, but in terms of just getting there, and we're talking a team to buy of this group, definitely Miami.
Yeah, agree 100%, Reed. The path is really the thing that I agree with too, because I just don't think either the Raptors or the Sixers can give them really a series in the second round if they avoid the Nets in the first round. And I talked about Joe Summers' article. I'm going to bring it back up again. The only team that meets that in the Eastern Conference that meets that top 8 offensive rating, top 11 defensive rating threshold is the Miami Heat. They're the only team that is there. Little concerned that Bam Adebayo's on the COVID list starting this first round series, but if they get the Hawks, Hornets, or Cavs, I'm not too worried in that first round series. But I just think like Miami, they had the blow up on the sideline of Jimmy Butler and Spo yelling at each other, and then they went on to win 6 straight at the end of the year before they sat everybody in the last game of the season. Like, this is a good basketball team. They play a lot of defense, like between PJ Tucker, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry. You have switchability. You have guys that are all NBA caliber defenders. Bam Adebayo is my pick for Defensive Player of the Year. Like, they have a very good team. I don't know if they have the offensive firepower for Milwaukee or Brooklyn, but if something crazy happens and like the Celtics make it out of that side of the thing, I love Miami to make it to at least make it to the finals.
Great coaching too.
Yeah.
Can't rule that out, especially with the potential Doc Rivers matchup.
Yeah, I think they just kind of know how to play playoff basketball. I think that's kind of their style over the course of the regular season. And there's times where just being in a half court set for as much as Miami likes to play just doesn't work out for them. There's just some regular season games where like the pace needs to be pushed a little bit. And every time they try to slow things down, so a lot of times it's going to work out in their favor. Other times it's not. But Butler knows how to get there. Adebayo, again, yes, missing potentially game 1 and a couple other games on the COVID list. Not as much of a worry now. You almost rather have him deal with it now than any other point. But I mean, we looked at Miami as a sleeper heading into the second half of the season where they were just kind of hanging on. They dealt with so many injuries and so many stoppages over the course of the year. Like, you're right. I think the blow up, if it would have happened for Jimmy Butler in Philadelphia or for Minnesota, we'd be talking about that team collapsing. If anything, it galvanized Miami. It kind of got them back on track and got them focused again. And if we're talking about coaches to trust in the postseason, it's hard to make a more compelling case than Eric Spoelstra. So I do think Miami at that value at the top of the East, and also with their path, as you mentioned, guys, to be able to get there makes a ton of sense. Donovan, you're not necessarily fading Miami, but there's another team in mind. Who's that?
Yeah, so it kind of goes against my Milwaukee pick because they would have to, play them to get to the finals. But I like Boston. And like I said earlier, I wouldn't be shocked if they beat Brooklyn in the first round. And so Brooklyn and Boston are kind of my top. They're fighting for number 2 in my eyes in the Eastern Conference. And I really like the idea of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown finally getting to play like top-tier basketball, top-tier playoff basketball, especially with Tatum coming into his own. Brown is improving every single year. And Reed mentioned, the Robert Williams injury. So Williams got hurt seven games ago. He's been out for 7 games. They went from being first in defensive rating to 7th, right? So they go from being just a god-tier defense to now just being a top 7 defense in the league, which is, it's still very, very elite. So like the concerns about their defense they still have all the tools to do whatever they need to do. And even in that span, their offensive rating is 6th in the league. They have an offensive rating over 120. Now I know a lot of teams have a very high offensive rating because the last like 10 games nobody really cares, but offensively they have a star. They have a guy who at the end of the game when you need a bucket and you need somebody who can go one-on-one, get an isolation bucket somewhere, they have that guy in Tatum. And then if you're talking about, okay, we're going to go and we're going to double Tatum, well, Brown can create his own shot and he can play make a little bit. The thing that's going to take Boston over the top is going to be whether or not Jason Tatum can finally figure out how to fully become a playmaker in the playoffs and understand how to take those double teams and turn them into opportunities for everybody else. But I think defensively they have, especially if Robert Williams comes back, defensively I think they have the highest upside in the conference. And then offensively, I think that they are just as good as anybody else offensively. And so if they get Brooklyn, and let's say that Robert Williams comes back game 4 and it's a 2-2 series, they for sure can win that series. And then you go into Miami and then you go into Milwaukee and then they match up kind of well with the Bucks, and those games are always
I agree with that.
Yeah, and so they match up well. Those games are always tough, and so it's going to be hard. They have one of the harder paths, especially if Brooklyn wins tonight. But I don't think that it's out of the question. I don't think that we should sleep on Boston, and so I think it makes a little bit of sense to take a chance on them.
I agree 100%. I just kept them off my future pick just because of the path. That's really the difference. That's how much harder to me the bottom half of the bracket is than the top. It's enough to say I'm not going to bet on this team. That's how much.
Yeah, and like in the East, like in the West, we talk. There's Phoenix, there's Golden State, and then Memphis, depending on how you see them. In the East, we're talking about 4 teams that can potentially make the finals. And then I know we're all out on Doc Rivers and Embiid and Harden and the Sixers. They still have an MVP candidate and James Harden, who's even as a second option is still better than a lot of other people's second option. And listen, we're just talking in the playoffs, like he's still better than a lot of guys. And so I'm not going to treat him like he's a bum or anything. Now, he might be if it comes to a game 6 and he got to do something. I don't know. That's not on me. But if we're just talking about on paper, James Harden and Joel Embiid, you could do a lot worse than that being your star trio or your star duo. So that reads 100% right. I'm just talking to verify the point about the path. That's it.
I have Boston as my fade, and Donovan, you make some really good points. But the big thing that scares me about the Celtics is the supporting cast after Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. You look at some of the other supporting casts in the East, and like obviously you have the Giannis, the Middleton, the Drew. Like there's 3 guys there. Celtics only have 2. Brooklyn has KD and Kyrie, but they're probably the best 2 that anybody has. You look at like a team like Miami. They have Victor Oladipo is now healthy. Somehow he dropped 40 points in the season finale. Did not.
Yeah, but against like a JV team.
But they go.
Me and you.
They have 6. Miami has 6 different guys who average double figures. They have Tyler Hero off the bench. They go Duncan Robinson, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent. They have a ton of guys that can shoot the ball. PJ Tucker shooting over 40% from 3. The Bucks have a ton of guys that can shoot the ball. Grayson Allen, Pat Connaughton, Bobby Portis. The thing that scares me about the Celtics is if they play against these teams that have better offenses. Marcus Smart, Al Horford, Grant Williams has shot the 3 well this year. I will not trust Grant Williams in the playoffs. I do not care what anyone says. But Grant Williams, I will give him kudos, has shot the ball well this year. But Derek White, Marcus Smart, Al Horford, like very questionable 3-point shooters. But all 3 of them under 35%. And the thing that scares me with the Celtics is like they are not deep. Like, are we really going to want them playing Peyton Pritchard minutes? Like, if they play the Nets, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving are going to see Peyton Pritchard out every single play. Like, Aaron Nesmith hasn't been able to stay in the rotation. Grant Williams is going to get picked out by Giannis and by Durant every single time down. So, like, yes, they have a great defense, but in the first round without Robert Williams, that defense is significantly limited. And, like, the Celtics, like, they have a great starting 5, and Ime Udoka has gotten away with playing all of those guys basically 35-plus minutes the entire second half of the year. Is that going to be sustainable where they play at a high enough level in a playoff series when these other teams between Brooklyn and Milwaukee, and if they end up making it past both of them, playing the Heat, are going 9 deep? I just don't see it. I don't. And you make a good point about like Tatum needs to be able to play make. Like if you have to have Marcus Smart on the floor to play make, and you want Derek White on the floor defensively, like you are punting on all of your shooting outside of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. You're just like, hey, we can't shoot the ball. Like those guys have to get a bucket every time. And with the way the playoffs are and the defense is heightened up, like we all know in the regular season, there's just times where it's just like, oh, whatever, like let them go. Like Giannis and Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday and whoever, if Ben Simmons is playing, PJ Tucker, like they're not going to be a ton of easy buckets for Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So the Celtics supporting cast is really what scares me, not their top two. That's why there's no way I think they make it out of the East this year.
Okay, I'll say this. I want to move on to Philly after, but you talk about playoff basketball. One of the most overrated things when we talk about playoffs is depth. Depth is it's very overrated when we talk about playoff basketball because you can play 10-9 guys in the regular season, right? People are taking nights off. Hey, we're going to limit your minutes tonight. There's a championship on the line. Like, I don't care if Jason Tatum's going to play 30, 35, 36 minutes. That's what he's going to do.
44 minutes.
He can. I'm just saying, how effective is he going to be in those 44 minutes when Giannis only has to play 36 because they can give him a spell because their bench is actually worth something.
He's going to be just fine. And we've seen Tatum and Brown do it before in the bubble. We saw Jaylen and Brown, and they played the Raptors, and every single game was a marathon game. And he said it himself, that was the hardest series he's ever played. They're going to be I'm not concerned about the depth with Boston. My concern, like you said, more would be with Derek White rather than Marcus Smart, because I've seen Marcus Smart do it. I've seen him, step up and be able to knock down shots. So I'm okay on that. The real fade that we are all on is Philly, right? And that's the fade candidate that we should all just let's agree, let's become friends again and talk about that, because they are so inconsistent. James Harden ruined Joel Embiid's MVP case, and you saw the other night when they played against Toronto, Harden goes 3 for 12 in that game. And so if you're talking about having to go right back to Toronto and play, Toronto's lineup is so crazy because they can throw Scotty Barnes at him, right? They could throw Scotty Barnes, they could throw OG at him. They could, if Pascal can switch out onto him. Fred VanVleet can get you some solid minutes against James. Like they're able to switch 1 through 4, even 1 through 5, depending on the lineup. And they're gonna give Philly a lot of problems. And so I'm with Peter, and Peter said it earlier. I'm going to pick Toronto to win this series. I think that their versatility on the defensive side of the ball is going to be huge. And then not having Matisse Thybulle in Toronto, that's going to swing at least one of those games to where Toronto very well could be up 3-1 going back to Philly for Game 5. So I'm staying 100% away from Philly.
To Donovan's point, like, are we sure that James Harden ruined Joel Embiid's MVP candidacy?
Yes.
The numbers are insane. Like, he led the NBA in scoring this year. He finished the month of April going 38-15, basically. Averaged 30.5, 12.6 in the month of March. Like, his worst scoring game was a 21-13 night against Toronto. What's that?
The narrative completely changed, because before that you're like, oh wow, look at Joel Embiid, he's doing it with Tyrese Maxey as the second best player. The moment you trade for James Harden, no matter how good he's playing, expectations are also they were fighting for the number 1 seed before Harden
fell to 4,
and they fall to 4. You have a whole bunch of these issues. They had their 2 honeymoon games against the I think they played
I said that as it was happening.
They killed the Knicks twice, and everybody's like,
"This is so bad." If we're talking about MVP candidates, the Nuggets were in the play-in game for a few days. Like,
but the Nuggets have a 3-game worse record than the Sixers with half the roster. I mean,
they didn't trade for James Harden.
Compare the roster. Aaron Gordon versus James Harden. We're not going to go down that path.
Yeah, exactly. The moment you trade for James Harden, you tell the world we are going for the number 1 seed. We have 2 superstars on the roster, and this is the play that we're going to make. And not only do you not end up with the number one seed, you end up worse than you were, and you do not look as dominant. And we saw what they look like. We saw the potential right off the bat. And then for the rest of the time, we see you underperforming. And Joel just ends up being collateral damage in that. So his MVP, the narrative completely changed. So yeah, James Harden ruined his MVP case because Embiid would have been just as much of a feel-good story as Jokic would have.
From a narrative perspective, that is a fair and completely legitimate point. But if we're actually talking about numbers for Embiid specifically, then
all-time season from Joel.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to that point, okay, so we're all collectively, we know this, that we're all collectively fading the Sixers. I know, Peter, you put Boston technically as your fade the future pick.
I already bet this. I bet the Sixers to lose first round, so I didn't even think they were worth like putting in a future. I'm not touching them after.
Yeah, I already bet. Okay. The Raptors, I saw the first thing and I bet the Raptors like plus 185.
So let's try to reverse the argument a little bit, because I think the points on why you should fade Philly are abundantly clear. My question is, again, like, as if we're looking to bet the series, you have to absorb it from both angles. My question then becomes, if we are fading Philadelphia, like what needs to go right for them? And do we think that there is just not enough of a chance for things to actually go in the right direction, to snowball in a positive movement for them? Because from a talent perspective, like, they do have a chance and they bring in Harden to make a sizable difference. But are we just all going off of the basis that those differences just aren't going to manifest itself in the postseason?
Yeah, they're at a significant coaching disadvantage against Nick Nurse and the Raptors. Flat out. And it really seems about the Utah Jazz and how they're kind of on their way out. They're heading for kind of a trade move on from like the core thing. Doc Rivers is like already putting in his like application at other jobs. I feel like they're going to get bounced. They're going to fire Doc Rivers, and that's going to be the scapegoat for this James Harden trade being an utter disaster. And not victory lapping. I'm not dancing on any grave. I understand I have like ill will towards Harden, but the Sixers gave up, and it was very apparent when the Nets played the Sixers last month. The Sixers gave up two important for one, like over the hill player. The Sixers desperately need a secondary playmaker in Seth Curry and a backup big man in Andre Drummond. They now play for the Nets. They didn't need James Harden necessarily. They needed, more shooting, more spacing. They now don't have that. Not to mention now they're without Thibault for half the series, which like there's a ton of irony and jokes in that one that Harden left the Nets for whatever, not even worth it. But the Thibault, who I don't even have like that high regard of in a playoff series, we're talking about depth and how you need to be able to do certain things. Thibault, not certain he's really a playoff guy yet, but the Sixers have nobody else to go to. They are so thin. And all of a sudden we expect James Harden is going to start beating guys off the bounce. They went 1-3 against the Raptors this season, and Harden had a terrible game. I mean, the Raptors have the exact anecdote to stop Harden. Long, rangy wings, and that could switch on him. Harden, I watch him all the time in the Nets. He can't finish at the rim, and he can't get by anyone. All of a sudden, he's going to get by 20-year-old Scotty Barnes, who has springs in his legs. Maybe Embiid carries the Sixers through this one series, but there's no way they're going on a title run. They're too poorly coached. They don't have enough depth. And I know depth being that like they don't have like a 5-man, 6-man rotation to go to. Embiid isn't built to carry a team like this in the postseason. We've seen him get banged up the past several postseasons.
And Embiid isn't built to beat this Raptors team really either. He had one of his worst games of the season against them. Their second to last time they played him, he was 6 of 18, I believe, at 21 points. And after the game, he talked about how they make it tough for him because they throw all that length at him in double teams. And read exactly what you said. When you don't have the shooting around him and Harden, like, who's he going to throw the ball to? And that's the argument, like, where maybe it's a good thing Thibault isn't going to play because Matisse Thybulle can't hit anything. He couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat. So it's like him being on the floor offensively kills them, even though he's their best perimeter defender. And I think there's a couple things that I looked at when I was writing the preview for this series with the Raptors. Toronto's net rating is only 0.6 worse than the Sixers this year. They were 12th. The Sixers were 9th. And then on top of that, both of these teams played a bottom 5 pace. So if the Sixers think their plan is, we'll slow it down, we'll get it to Embiid and Harden, and that's exactly how the Raptors want you to play. They're not going to play up tempo. They would rather slug it out with you defensively. And if you tell me it comes down to a close possession game and I have to trust Doc Rivers to win me the game over Nick Nurse, there's no way. There's absolutely no way. Doc Rivers would rather play DeAndre Jordan and Paul Millsap than Paul Reed, when very clearly the two old guys have no value on this team. If this series comes down to 1 or 2 games or like a couple one possession games, the Raptors will probably win all of them. There is no way Philly walks through this series, which is why if they have to play a battle here and then play Miami, there's no way they get past the second round. I don't think they get past the first.
Wow. All right, so there you have it. The Sixers, basically, from all accounts here from the BetSided team, a full-on fraud. Stay away. Does that mean that everybody watching should then go ahead and fade us and take Philadelphia? I suppose that's certainly one way to look at it. We're not going to give you the full Cougs thing on the way out for anybody that's been with us since the very beginning. There's not going to be any tattoos bets along the way as well. But yes, Philadelphia just not in a particularly good situation for any of us to feel comfortable about them in the futures market. So again, one more time, rapid fire through the contender stage. My future is on Miami at 12-1. My fade is on the Sixers, also at 12-1. Let's go Donovan, Reed, and then Peter.
Yeah, so my future is on the Celtics at 10-1. My fade is the Sixers.
Yeah,
the prices.
Futures on the Heat just based on the bracket, and then my fade is the Sixers. Even if they get out of the first round, I can't see them making a finals run with kind of the limitations of the roster.
Future on Miami, fading the Sixers and the Celtics.
All right. So we got just a little bit more time left. I think just for a quick second, because I think we're all in agreement that we don't see any of these teams actually winning the title. Maybe they surprise us and go to the NBA Finals. And if that's the case, you have a great futures bet on them that you can go ahead and jump on the other side, hedge that bet as quickly as you possibly can. I'll run through the numbers real fast over at WinBet, starting with the Dallas Mavericks at 25-1. But we're still unsure about the health status of Luka Doncic. The Mavericks basically indicated that there's no timetable for him at this point. Denver also coming in at 25-1, likely with the perhaps the back-to-back MVP and Nikola Jokic. Utah's at 28-1. The Clippers, assuming they get past the Timberwolves, and if they don't get past them, have to win that game against the 9-10 team. They're at 45-1. Minnesota's at 60-1. The Bulls and the Raptors. Chicago at one point the number one team in the East for several months this year. They're at 75-1 along with the Raptors. And then you got the probably not going to happen category of Cleveland at 100-1, Atlanta at 125-1, the Pelicans at 200-1, Hornets 250-1, and then the San Antonio Spurs. Throw down $1, I suppose. There are 1,000-1 over at WinBet Sportsbook. So let's do a quick quick look, fade or future. Reed, I'll start with you. Give me your future out of this category that you feel like, if there's a chance, it's worth it at this price point, and then also your fade.
I had a future on the Mavericks. I thought that they were going to get the 3 seed and have a path, but now they're in the 4 with Luka Doncic injury. They're playing the Suns in the second round. I can't really see it. In terms of fading, I'm going to go with the same series, the Jazz. If there's one team that's ripe for completely blowing it against the Mavericks, shorthanded, if Doncic should come back, it is Utah. So I think Utah, they're going nowhere real fast. Denver also, I just think that, it doesn't seem like Murray and Porter are coming back, just not enough firepower in the tank with just Jokic. We saw it last year with the Suns series, just not enough to make a run. So I think the Western Conference, it's really kind of quickly closing with the Mavs. That dark horse, it's kind of over for them.
Yeah, the Mavs, certainly, depending on the status of Doncic, are going to be fairly interesting. Is there anybody here that buys if Utah can start? Like, they're still the top-rated offense in the league this year. Is there anybody that's betting them to at least make a run without Doncic to get past the first round?
Oh, maybe get the first round.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's different. But they're going to be huge favorites if Luka's hurt. But then they run to Phoenix and they'll just get absolutely blitzed. They blew a 15-point fourth quarter lead to them last weekend.
No.
Yeah, they suck. Like it's just plain and simple. They suck. I can't stand Utah. I'm just waiting for them to lose in 5 in whatever series that they play. And Gobert gets traded to Charlotte and they could be good. Donovan Mitchell gets traded to the Knicks and then we can all we can all be happy. So that's what I'm waiting on.
Rudy Gobert is the ultimate Charlotte Hornet. Like that.
He would be good there.
He would be great.
He'd be a great fit there.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get Rudy Gobert or Miles Turner to the Hornets for like 3 years now.
Same.
All right. So we're done on the Jazz. They're cooked. Donovan, what about for your future and fade out of this final tier and category?
Yeah, so my obvious fade is in the West it's Utah, and then in the East it's Chicago. Chicago just has no chance against Milwaukee. They've completely lost their like you said earlier. They've lost their identity. They've shown all year that they can't beat elite teams. So they're my fade out the East, and then for my futures in the East I have Toronto. I think Nick Nurse is a great coach. And then the ability to switch 1 through 4 in the playoffs and have somebody else and always have somebody on a primary score, that's just going to be huge. So maybe they can mess around and make some things happen depending on how the bracket shakes up. So I would have them in the East, and then even in the West, the Clippers have a little something. It's not a lot, but it's a little bit, and you may be able to find something with them, especially with Paul George coming back. They've been good with Paul George back.
Yeah, and other than that game that they somehow blew to Chicago, which was one of the bad beats of the year in the NBA, where I still can't figure out the 2 foul calls that they had against the Bulls that made no sense whatsoever, but they would have won 7 straight as opposed to their last 5 and 6 of their last 7. Some terrible, terrible calls. And they've beat up on good teams too. They've had blowouts in 4 of their last 5 games. They beat the Suns in the process as well. Like the Clippers are coming in looking good, but I don't believe they're going to have Kennard tonight. I don't believe Kennard is traveling with the Clippers tonight against Minnesota, and that's the guy that I believe led the NBA in 3-point percentage this year. So that's a sizable loss.
Really quick on the Clippers, they're a team that, like, price wise, if they win tonight and they get that 17, they somehow start pushing Memphis. They're a team that's like price is going to quickly change just because we know the upside. We know they have superstars with Paul George. Maybe Kawhi comes back. So the Clippers are a team that, like Donovan said, there is like a window there where things could really turn on tonight. I know Pete has more to say about them.
Let's more than a window. It's a door, baby. Let's open the door here for the Clippers. All right. I will put this to you. I bet. So today I have a future on the Suns and I put a future on the Clippers today. And the reason why is if the Clippers somehow upset the Suns. I want the Clippers to lose tonight. I think they should lose tonight. I know first round it's a better match for them, but if they lose tonight to the Timberwolves and they get the Suns, still the Los Angeles team is top 10 in the NBA in defensive rating. It slipped when Paul George was hurt and when they were dealing with injuries in the middle of the season. It's going to get better. This team is better right now than it was at the beginning of the year before Paul George got hurt because they have Norman Powell now, because they have Robert Covington. If Luke Kennard is healthy for the first round, I'm not saying they're going to beat the Suns. They're going to be major underdogs in that series. The Suns are the best team in basketball. They probably win. But if somehow the Clippers upset the Suns, they're going to get a potentially Luka Doncic-less Mavericks or the fraud Jazz in the second round.
The 1-2-3 Cancun Jazz.
So if you think the Clippers have a small chance to upset the Suns, they are looking at a very possible chance at the Western Conference Finals. And you may say, oh, well, like 8 seed, like can this happen? They did this with this team last season. They did not have Kawhi Leonard. They beat the Jazz. They ran Rudy Gobert off the floor. They'll do the same thing. And my biggest thing on the Clippers, Tyronn Lue is the best coach in the NBA. It's hands down, he's the best coach in the NBA. The fact that this team lost Kawhi Leonard, lost Paul George, and still fought and got the 8 seed this year is honestly, it's extremely impressive. They were running out lineups of like Amir Coffey, Brandon Boston Jr. for like the entire season. He's resurrected Reggie Jackson's career. This team is very, very dangerous. If I'm the Suns, I'm kind of mad if I have to play them in the first round because I would have loved like the Lakers to somehow sneak their way in and get a freebie in the first round. Like this is the perfect spot. If they can beat the Suns, you get them in a conference finals matchup. Maybe Kawhi Leonard comes back. I wouldn't bank on it, but if they get to the conference finals and he's somewhat ready, why not? At that point, the window's open. So I don't hate the Clippers at their current price. I think if they can get past the Suns, the road is there, and Paul George being back, like this might have been a top 5 team if Paul George doesn't get hurt. So the fact that you can get them at this price as an 8 seed, I think is pretty good.
It's a really interesting call about wanting to play Phoenix. And the more I think about it, the more I like it because against Memphis, and again, playoff basketball is going to likely change and dictate some of these terms, and Memphis isn't going to necessarily be able to run the way that they would in general, and especially come second half and fourth quarter of games. But that's also a team that, with their youth, can wear out a team like the Clippers that is a very veteran-laden team. So the matchup, you're right, from the perspective of going up against Phoenix, that is a more veteran-type team that has Chris Paul, that you're still trying to figure out just how healthy he is in the postseason. Maybe you're right. Like, maybe that is a team that could potentially, if the situations line up, if the Clippers continue to stay red hot, yeah, I don't hate that play. And at 45-1, it's probably worth a little bit of a sprinkle on.
Not a window, it's a door.
I think the thing is, like, I'd rather have to play Phoenix, and if they beat Phoenix, like, you get the easy second matchup, than go through Memphis, who's a top 10 team offensively and defensively, and then be like, oh yeah, by the way, now you have to play the Warriors in the next round. Like, I think that is a much harder ask than, like, if they get lucky and they upset the Suns, like, that price is one, it's going to drop a ton, and then you have, like, okay, we might be in the conference finals, and then anything can happen. So
right. It's a value play. And I also thought it was interesting that none of us mentioned the Grizzlies as a possible contender. We didn't fade them, but we didn't take them either. So, that they weren't my pick as far as a future ticket. I went with the Raptors just because I love their size and their versatility, and they can guard anybody on the court, and they've just been set up so well for this types of playoffs. And that Nick Nurse is going to be able to run circles around most of the coaches that he faces in the postseason. Like, that's another guy that will maximize his talent there. I think they're just set up very well for playoff basketball. And I think 75-1, purely from a value standpoint, it just sets up very well for them moving throughout the course of the postseason. So I like them at 75-1, but I am starting to think a little bit with regards to your Raptors pick. Also, our Ian McMillan, by the way, checking in on the show today. He says the Raptors in 5 ahead of their first round series against the Sixers. That certainly adds up, given what we had just talked about with Philadelphia today. Also, Beers and Bowties checking in on the show before we wrap things up. He says, Donovan, it sounds like you have the Clippers winning tonight. The Wolves were getting it done without Towns, and now he's back tonight. So can you explain your rationale for this pick?
Yeah, so, and I actually put this in. I did a bold predictions for tonight's game. So I think, like, so the narrative around Paul George has been that he is like a choker and he does not show up in big time games. I think a lot of that was kind of proven wrong last year again in that series against the Suns. And so I'm listen, and Pete said it about how good the Clippers have been. If you go back to when Paul George has come back, and if you thought like the last game when everybody's sitting, they're 5-1. They have the best net rating in the league. They're tied with Miami at 12.8. The net rating is plus 12.8 in the 6 games that Paul George has played since he's been back. They're killing people. And so I think that Minnesota, who hasn't been here before, if you're talking about a 1-game scenario to advance, Minnesota doesn't have a better coach. They don't have the best player on the floor, and they're not playing better right now than the Clippers are. So I'll take Los Angeles tonight, and I might take them pretty substantially.
Okay, they're 3-point underdogs. That line moved from 2.5 following the news that Kennard did not travel with the team over at WinBet. Total moved up just a half a point from 230 to 230.5. All right, before we get out of here, let's go ahead and take all this collected information over the last hour and 9 minutes and 10 seconds and go ahead and actually give a pick for the teams that we're going to expect in the NBA Finals, and then who walks away with a good old Larry Trophy. So Donovan, Reed, Peter, and then I'll close things out. Your Finals pick: who beats who, how many games, and who's your winner?
Oh, this is tough. Okay, I'm gonna try to will this into existence because I really want this to happen. We're gonna have Milwaukee versus Golden State in the Finals, and the Bucks are gonna win in 7.
We didn't even mention the Suns this entire time because I feel like they've just become like a formality. But I'll go Nets over Suns in 6.
We did, other than we talked about how the Clippers can beat them in the first round.
Yeah, we talked badly about the overwhelming title favorites now. No, Nets beat Suns in 6. By the time the Nets hit the finals, it's open season.
I need Joanne to clip this so we don't get my Clippers taken in this one, because I'm thinking finals rematch. We got Bucks Suns. I love the Clippers, but I think the Suns are highly better than every other team in the Western Conference. I think the Suns win the title, though. I'm going to go Phoenix in 7 over the Bucks.
Okay.
I agree. I think it's another finals rematch, but I think it's in 6, and it goes to the Phoenix Suns. This is a bit of redemption for me after holding a Suns ticket at 80-1 last year, only for it not to go through. And of course, I have no futures tickets on the Suns this year, so naturally they'll go ahead and win the NBA Finals. Suns over the Bucks in 6. Chris Paul, NBA Finals MVP. So there you have it. Full breakdown for the NBA Finals in our debut segment of Fade or Future for my guys Donovan, Reed, and Peter. I'm Ben. Make sure you guys check out all the great stuff over at BetSided over the course of the play-in round as well as the NBA postseason. Whether you're looking for game previews, predictions, props, analysis, anything you need when it comes to betting on these games, we will have them for you. Also, make sure if you haven't done so already, go ahead and find us on YouTube, youtube.com/BetSided. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, weigh in on the comments, and please do subscribe. And check out Bet and Breakfast. Our podcast has returned on the weekends, full live streams getting you ready for all the games to bet on Saturdays and Sundays. Until then, we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks so much for tuning in to Best Bets on a Tuesday.